Hello and welcome, fellow lifelong learners. Thanks for joining me for One More Thing, a radio show all about cultivating our most valuable asset, our mind, and fostering a sense of curiosity to learn one more thing. We feature passionate practitioners and seasoned experts in numerous areas of interest for lifelong learners of all ages. One More Thing is sponsored by Kiffin & Company, a corporate learning and talent development consulting firm, and I'm your host, Kiffin McCoy Albert, a certified professional in talent development, learning advocate, and your fellow lifelong learner. Welcome to the show. When I was a kid, my mom would often sing a song or tell me a story at bedtime, and sometimes those stories were ones that she made up or were the first part of a story she had started writing. Her creativity far surpasses mine in basically every way, especially in artistic endeavors. But she did pass on her love of reading and writing to me. And I have on occasion found pages of a story I started at an earlier point in my life, and it always brings me joy and makes me think, maybe I should write a book for real. But then I remind myself that I would first have to actually finish the book, and second, I would need to actually publish the book, which always has seemed too daunting. Well, today's guest is an author who has finished and self-published multiple books. I know I am looking forward to learning about his journey, and I hope you are too.
Maximize impact with tailored solutions by partnering with Kiffin & Company. Developing your team is an investment, but it doesn't have to be just an expense. Discover more at kiffinandcompany.com and start your journey to effective learning today.
Partnered with his wife, Ann Gibbons, under the umbrella of Gibbons Fitz Inc., Bill Fitz has written and published 10 books within 2 series and in different genres. There are currently 3 Song of Narne books, which are epic adventures in a magical world, and 7 books in the Needed Killing series, which are cozy mysteries with a Southern flair. And he is not done yet. Bill's path to becoming an author was a windy one and a lifelong learner's dream. He lives now in Vero Beach, Florida, where he and his wife Ann serve as staff to their 2 cats, Luna and Andy. I hope you are excited to find out more about Bill, his path, his life as an author, maybe some lessons learned along the way, and certainly about his books. Bill, welcome to One More Thing.
Thank you so much, Kiffin. Delighted to be here.
Well, let's start by talking about the beginning of your novel writing career. So your first novel was called The Screaming Sword, and it is also book 1 of the Song of Narne series. And I heard that at that point, you took notes in a composition book and typed on an electric typewriter. So my question is, does that mean you started writing that book decades ago, or do you just have an affinity for a more analog technology?
It's definitely I started writing that book decades ago, and when that was really state-of-the-art note-taking and manuscript production. It's interesting, when I look back on my checkered career, a lot of the time my writing coincided with how unhappy I was at wherever I was working at the time. And it's where I started with The Screaming Sword. And then that really led to the murder mysteries, because at that time I was working for the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and had gotten a new boss of bosses, and wasn't having a good time working with him. And I would come home every day and complain to my wife, "You won't believe what he did, you won't believe what he's doing," and complain about the PowerPoint presentations he was making us sit through and all this. And Ann said, "Maybe you ought to kill him off in a book." And so I actually took to it at that point, and that's the first book in the Needed Killing series. Was about my boss at the time, who, in my opinion, needed killing. So there we go. So we came up with a title, and that's what got me started writing the mysteries.
A non-violent way. I like it. Well, do you mind me asking when that was, with the first one, when you were taking notes on the composition book and using a typewriter? What year was that when you started?
Oh, Lord, that was back the late 1970s.
Gotcha. And so how did you learn how to write or how to develop characters? I know we're going to talk in a few minutes about, your character development and stuff, but how did you learn how to write? Which sounds so silly, but hopefully you get what I'm asking.
Oh, absolutely. I joke and I tell people that my really biggest advice, if you want to be a successful writer, is to be sure and marry the best editor you can find. And I was fortunate enough to fall in love with a woman who is an excellent editor and actually comes from a family, a writing family. Her father was a published novelist. I had an older brother who did a lot of writing, and I can remember being in grade school and getting to go to a play that he had written that was being put on by the school, which was indoctrination at an early age, I guess you want to call it. So,
Yeah, very cool.
all right.
Were you a big reader too then?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, it was. In fact, that was a bone of contention between my brother and I. I would put a book down and walk off and come back, and he would have picked it up and be reading it. So whenever a book I was reading disappeared, I knew where to look.
That's been a big thing for me and my sister, my mom specifically. My mom and sister have an enormous collection of books. I'm a little bit more minimalist in just the stuff, but being able to have those adventures through reading, I feel like if I was going to write, I probably would write something that I would want to read. And so I've read a lot of things that I'm like, well, that really wasn't that great. Or I am not an editor, but I find myself editing as I read things, being like, well, that was a terrible word, or,
Right.
finding typos and things like that. So, yeah, so being an avid reader probably played into your writing as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, now that we're talking about it, I realize that growing up, we would spend time that we would go to the library. My sister and I and mother would all go to the library, and we would bring home books. And I think that was when really I started reading the Rex Stout Nero Wolfe mystery series, and we all read them. My mother read them, my sister read them, I read them. My other sister wasn't a reader, so she didn't play in on that too much. But yeah, we read those books, and then when I got into science fiction, Robert A. Heinlein's juvenile books, which then led me to his adult writing, just went right along with the reading. So that's been a big part, and that really I can sit back and look and say some of the editors, some of the writers that I voraciously consumed have come back in my writing. I think when I look at how my detective and the murder mystery has developed, a lot of that was, I won't say emulation, but a realization of how Robert Parker and his Spencer novels handled the characters and developed the story, which was all fascinating.
Yeah, gotcha. So more of an inspiration than an emulation.
Yes. The notebook and the typewriter has given way to software for writers. I had a boss that once explained to me that the Microsoft Word was invented to replace the IBM Selectric typewriter. And that's what it did. And that enabled secretaries all throughout the world to graduate from the typewriter to a word processing system. But that doesn't help a writer. Well, I use a particular software that's called Scrivener. It's designed for novels and plays and however else you want to write it. It gives you, a lot more flexibility in that if you're using a typewriter and you type out a paragraph and it doesn't work, well, you pull the sheet of paper out, you toss it in the trash. With Scrivener, you go, oh, well, I can't use it right now, but let me move it over into maybe I'll use it later section. If I like the phrase or the wording I'd use, I can go back and look and see what it is. So it's really a powerful tool and really helped me get into self-publishing.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I want to talk to you about the self-publishing piece, but keeping with the software for a second. So I had no idea that there was specific software for writers. I just assumed that you would use Word. In my line of work, there's obviously software for specific training things, but a lot of times, you start with Word, which I guess makes sense. But thinking about what you said, okay, you don't want to throw away a piece of paper, right, with a typewriter, but even with Word, it's pretty rigid in how it's used. So it sounds like with the software that you're using, it's a lot more flexible of allowing you to kind of move parts into a holding place and all. So is it set up very different than Word?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I've gotten so far away from Word, I'm really having difficulty being able to differentiate. In the software that I'm using, I essentially have chapters that I'm working on, and they're one right after the other. And then within the chapters, I have scenes. It's designed so that I can go through and I do an outline, say what I want to happen, and then if I go, oh, I want that to happen earlier, particularly in the fantasies where you try to get a timeline going as to what happens over the course of the saga. It's really invaluable to be able to go, oh no, this magical event needs to predate this event.
Right.
So the fact that all your files and all your chapters are there together in a document, and Lord, you can cut and paste and move and just, it's really fantastic. There is definitely a learning curve with Scrivener. It's not intuitive.
Right.
To an extent, I say that, and then I'm looking back going, Well, actually, that's what's not intuitive is when you get into compiling it and getting it ready to be an ebook. And that formatting and layout, that takes a little time. That takes some creativity. But there are companies out there now that'll just be happy to take your documentation and format it for you for a price.
Yeah, of course.
The self-publishing industry, as it was, have really come a long way since 2009, 2010, when I first started looking at it. It's just amazing what's available now.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so two things. One, having a software that's specific, is it something that you would recommend to a new writer?
Oh, absolutely. There are so many features that are built into this thing. For one, it automatically saves every, I don't know, 3 or 4 seconds. It'll save your work so that you've always got that ability to go back. Even sweeter, when you go back and edit or rewrite, you can take a snapshot of your scene and it will save it. And then you can do whatever it is you want to do and then go, oh, geez, I messed that up. Let me go back and restore from the snapshot and recover entirely what you've been doing. So it's a much more forgiving environment, I think, for a writer. Or at least I find it that way. But I don't mean to say that it's the only one. I'm sure, well, I know that there are several others out there that are advertised. Once you've looked at it on Facebook or on Google, you'll get picked up and advertisers will try to convince you to try their stuff.
Yeah, targeted ads for sure.
Oh,
Well, so
absolutely.
it sounds like one of the big benefits then is that it also, even though there's a learning curve, it allows you to format it and get ready to self-publish. And so let's talk a little bit about that. You've self-published, I think, all of your books thus far. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yes.
And you used the Kindle Direct Publishing through Amazon to self-publish, correct? Is that correct?
That's what I'm doing now. Yes.
Okay.
When I first got into the self-publishing around 2009, 2010, I had a couple books and had sent it out to some friends and relatives. And my sister sent me a clipping from the Washington Post talking about a guy by the name of Mark Coker, who had written a book called Secrets to eBook Publishing Success. And the man he and his wife had written a book, had tried to get it published, couldn't find a publisher, and he decided to heck with it. He was going to publish it himself. And he set up a company called Smashwords for people that wanted to publish their book, for self-publishing books. And that's really what got us started. We could submit our manuscript to the company. It would grind it out and whatnot and send it back to you and let you look at how you'd done. And with my wife's help, knowing what books look like and what they should look like, we were able to reformat and edit it to get books that are good. Since then, I guess the earliest books didn't sizzle. And one of his things in his book is if you're selling ebooks, you got to have a good cover because that's all the reader sees is that thumbprint on the online. Get a good cover, write a good book, publish it, and you'll be successful. That was pretty much his guidelines was first write a good book, then everything else comes behind. Originally, if you wanted to publish with Amazon, you had to submit something in a Mobi format. Amazon now, they've got tools that they can let you use. Tools to create your cover, tools to format your book. They've even got a KDP University where you can go and get online courses that talk to you about publishing.
Wow, so it sounds like for someone wanting to publish a book, this is a real viable way, even as a first timer.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they'll hold your hand through the process. In fact, they just came out with a beta program where they can use AI to transform your written book into an audible book. And they're making that available to authors, like I say, in the beta version. It doesn't work perfectly. It's a bit of a challenge sometimes, particularly if you get into, as I do in my fantasies, some really odd words that aren't in the English language. AI is not quite sure. Well, I have cats that make a number of different noises. And as far as AI is concerned, a cat says meow, and that's it.
Gibbons Fitz, Inc. is a collaboration of author Bill Fitz and his wife, Ann Gibbons, for the publishing of multiple books within the Song of Narne series and Needed Killing series. These books can be found on Amazon and have both Kindle and paperback versions. Check out their website at www.billfitzauthor.com and Facebook pages too.
Okay, I'm excited to hear about your books too. So, how do you come up with your plot? How do you come up with your characters? And do you have any rules for naming characters? Things like that. So, stuff that might be interesting to folks who are writers or even to those of us who just are avid readers.
Okay, let's see. Plots. I do a lot of brainstorming with my wife about plots. And typically when we're driving somewhere, we don't turn on the radio. We don't listen to audible books. We essentially talk about plots and what different things that we can have happen. The fun thing about the Needed Killing series, from He Needed Killing to He Needed Killing 2 to She Needed Killing, we've gotten into the Fink Needed Killing. We're going to write the Liar Needed Killing. So we identify the person who needs killing, and then we work backwards. That's the current state of affairs. With the fantasies, that's a different one. I wondered what it was like for a magician, somebody like Merlin or Gandalf, when they were young, before they became old and wise and grizzled. And I mean, that's what at the time, back in the 70s, wizards were all old and had been through ages of existence. So I wanted to write one about a wizard that grew up to his powers and wasn't really comfortable with it, being that powerful. So that's been the storyline and the Screaming Sword series. He doesn't care for swords, which is kind of interesting in a sword and sorcery novel. With the murder mysteries, we come up with someone who needs killing. Then we come up with some creative ways to kill them off. After the first 2 books were out and the word got around that I was writing a series where people needed killing, we had people come up and volunteer. We were at a cocktail party and 2 women came up and said, "Could you kill off our brother?" And in our like, well, what's he done? There are a wealth of people out there that evidently, at one point in life, have made themselves terribly unappealing to the rest of the world.
Well, the way that yours started from a boss that, killing him on paper was a much better alternative to for real. I think that probably would appeal to a lot of people who are angry or, hurt by someone else. So, not to negate the effort and all that went into creating those Nia Killing series books, but it seems like that they were a little easier being a series that was centered around the same basic happenings, obviously someone being killed because they needed to be, versus in the fantasy series where it really, and I guess that being a series in general helps a little bit because you have kind of guide rails around what you're doing, but that one was maybe a little bit more difficult creatively.
Absolutely, Kiffin. The nice thing about writing murder mysteries is that it's not that it's formulaic, but bingo, you got to have a character that gets killed.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you're going to have a character that killed him. So then you've got a character that needs killing and a character that goes and breaks down and kills the person, and then you've got the character that figures it all out. And that's it. For those 3 characters, you've got the core of your book. Everything else then is bringing in red herrings. How do you distract the reader from knowing from page 1 that this is the murderer? And then how do you reveal the fact that is the murderer? What clues do you drop as you go along that are not red herrings, but valid clues? I say it's straightforward in a weird kind of way because you're trying to make it as convoluted as possible so that it's not straightforward, but the core there, it's just boom, boom, boom. And then how do you disguise it? How do you hide it? It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that is fun because you want people to get it. Or at least I think you kind of want them to think that they know the answer, but they're not sure. I know when I read mysteries or watch mysteries and things, I'm always trying to figure it out. And it's rare that I am really surprised. And I almost think sometimes when I'm really surprised, I'm like, well, that can't be right. It almost is a turnoff, but you also don't want it to be very obvious. So that's an interesting thought that you got to go into the plot thinking about how can you drop those clues without giving it away.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, our time is going so fast. I feel like I could ask a million questions about the different books, but a couple of things I do want to ask. And one of those is I know that there were a couple of major events that happened in your wife's life to change things. So one of those being the tornado in Tuscaloosa and then of course COVID. So I'd love to know how did those 2 major events, natural disaster and a worldwide pandemic, impact your writing?
The tornado. Well, that happened 2011, and at that point, that was when I was writing He Needed Killing because I was so unhappy at work. and actually got sent home from work that day early because the tornadoes were predicted. The tornado came through, wiped out the house. We had to move. And that's really, I think, when I began to think of retiring. But the discipline of coming home every day and sitting down and writing for a couple of hours, which is really what I did while I was working, really got entrenched at that point, or got established. COVID, on the other hand, was a real revelation to me as to what sparks my writing and whatnot. Like I said, at the time when we went into the quarantine pandemic hit, I had outlined the next two books, well, I guess the next three books in the Song of Narne series. Had it all laid out, knew what was going to happen, knew who the characters were going to be, knew how the villain was going to end up, and how it was all going to work out, and then sat down to try to write it and couldn't do it. The words did not come, the words did not flow. I said, okay, well, fine, but maybe this is not time. The mysteries are a nice break from writing the fantasies. They're not quite as entangled. And the detective and I work real well together. And so we had to publish the sixth book in the Need a Killing series, and had written the blurb at the back of it on the Nobody Needed Killing, and had outlined it and talked about it. And we knew who was going to get killed, and how she was going to get killed, and who the villain was, and had come up with some minor characters that were going to make the plot complicated. And I couldn't write it either. It just dried up. About the same time, I was invited to give a talk to a group of media professionals in Alabama, and I started looking at creativity and what it all meant, and learned that there were two types of creativity. There's conceptual, which is just boom, it comes to you overnight, and then experimental, where you develop it over time. And the quick snapshot is that conceptual generally happens to mathematicians and scientists and authors when they're young, and boom, they have this concept that's new and novel. And I had none of it going on at that time. And then when the pandemic eased up and we were able to go out and start mingling with people and whatnot, and I went out to a restaurant where we were seated outside, but we could see people coming and going and talking. And I have to admit, I wasn't a real good partner at the time, and said, I just couldn't help myself. I was watching everybody, what they were doing, and taking little snapshots of what the activity was. And that opened up the taps, and I was able to go back and write. It really made a difference and made me more conscious of what it is I'm doing. Now I'm doing it. It was fascinating.
Yeah, that makes sense, that being around people, seeing people and the differences and how human beings are gave you some inspiration.
That's one of the things about moving to this retirement community. And keep saying, you got to write a book about this one. Some of the fellow residents are interesting, to say the least. So we'll see how they work into the Need a Killing series. If they do, we'll see. How about that?
I can imagine. Maybe we need to have a whole nother show on retirement communities, because my husband's great aunt, his grandmother is now passed, but when they lived in a very nice one, and were literally known as the sisters, and some of the stories from there are just hilarious. Well, one of the questions that I'm asking all of my guests is, what are you currently learning? What's something that is on your radar that's an interest right now that you're learning about?
Ann and I are learning a lot about marketing and self-publishing. If you don't have a publisher, and even nowadays, if you have a publisher, the marketing is really left up to the author. We're trying to come to grips with exactly how to use Facebook and other social medias to get the word out about the book and to get people interested in it, which is one of the reasons why I'm so delighted to do this. If it's another pebble out there, and get the word out that we've got a book that might be fun to read. So.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. Well, so one of the things that I really like about having this show that's all about lifelong learning is that I'm talking to lots of different types of people with different backgrounds on different topics. And so obviously this concept, and we didn't have time today to go into your background, but you mentioned that you had I think you used the word checkered. That might be a little strong, but a varied career path that led you to writing. And so now your focus is on the writing, and you're learning about marketing and all the things that it means to be a self-published author. But with the writing itself, if I understood you correctly, your first book you published in around 2011, 12.
Right.
And so do you mind me asking how old you were at the time?
Not a problem. 61.
So the thing that I love is with this whole concept of lifelong learning, you had varied career path, but then at 61 published your first book, and now at
73.
73 you have published 10 books and are still writing. So I think that that's a lovely sentiment to end on, is to everyone to think about that no matter what age you are, if you're 12 and you're writing your first book, or if you are 73 and you are writing your 11th book, that
Absolutely.
that continuing on and being interested in finding new things in the world that capture your interest and that you pursue is such a vital piece to our humanness.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, Kiffin. You're absolutely right. Yes. It's
Awesome. Well, any final thoughts you want to share before we wrap up?
You ask about naming characters or creating characters. Once I put them down on the page, once I start writing about them, they develop their own personalities. They develop their own characteristics. And if I try to get them to do things that they're not really comfortable doing, they don't work with me. They refuse. They hold their breath. They count until I go back and I go, okay, fine, let's do it your way. So I'm not sure what that is about imagination or your mind or whatnot, but there are characters when I set them down and I just give a name to them and pick them up, boom, they're full blown in my mind. It's always interesting to sit down there and at the screen and see what's going to come out.
I've heard from authors before something along that line of you don't really write the story, it writes itself if you let it, and that you can't force it. So it sounds like that's
Right.
exactly right, that it, if you try to force something with a character and it just doesn't work, that you just have to let it kind of flow out of you.
Absolutely. You and
Very
your
cool.
characters have to work together, right?
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. Well, thank you so much for joining me here on One More Thing. It's been interesting hearing about how you got into writing and how you've self-published and all. And so one more time, I want to mention that your books are, your two series are the Needed Killing series and the Song of Narne series, both of which can be found on Amazon. But you have Bill Fitts, BILLFITTS, author.com, where people can read more about you. They can contact you if they want. And I believe that there are links to take you to those Amazon order pages as well, correct?
Absolutely. You got it.
Awesome.
Thank you, Kevin.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for being here and appreciate you sharing your knowledge.
Enjoyed it. Thank you, Kevin.
Talking to Bill about writing and self-publishing made me think about the design and development of learning, especially e-learning. While many people may think an animated PowerPoint is learning, I can tell you that there is much more capability for interactivity and engagement with software that's been created specifically for e-learning development. Finding the right story to tell, method of delivery to engage learners, and the right level of simplicity or complexity for ensuring learners understand and know how to apply the knowledge or skills is an art form all into its own. Anyone can write, but not everyone is a writer. Similarly, anyone can create learning, but not everyone is an effective instructional designer. The next time you take an online course, think about the aspects of design and development that were used and know that there are those of us who really care about doing it well. Thank you again to my guest, Bill Fitts. Thank you to today's sponsor, Gibbons Fitts Inc. You can find links to purchase any of their available books at billfittsauthor.com. And as always, thank you for tuning in week after week. You've been listening to One More Thing, a radio show on the Power Me Up radio station on iHeartRadio. I'm your host, Kiffin McCoy Albert. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to you tuning in next time as we continue cultivating your mind with one more thing.